My hands were numb. My stomach was so heavy that every breath hurt. With one arm, I held my 1-year-old daughter, Emma, tightly against my chest. With the other, I dragged an old brown travel bag that held everything we still owned. 3 sweaters. A baby blanket. Some diapers. And one family photo. That was all our life had become. If you're wondering how a 26-year-old pregnant woman ended up homeless in the middle of a snowstorm, stay with me. Because what happened that night completely changed our lives forever. My name is Olivia Carter. Just 6 months earlier, I believed I had the perfect family. A loving husband. A beautiful little girl. And another baby growing safely inside me. At least, that's what I thought. The doctor smiled during my checkup. Your baby looks healthy. I walked out of the hospital holding the ultrasound picture. I couldn't wait to surprise my husband, Daniel. I imagined him smiling. Maybe even crying. Instead, I walked into the house and heard another woman's voice. I froze. Daniel wasn't alone. I quietly stepped toward the living room. He was laughing, holding another woman in his arms. And then I heard the words that shattered everything. She still thinks this baby will save our marriage. The woman laughed. Daniel laughed too. At that moment, my whole world collapsed. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply turned around, holding my little girl, while the ultrasound picture slipped from my fingers onto the floor. I stood outside the house for nearly 10 minutes. The snow hadn't started yet. But inside me, everything had already turned cold. Emma rested quietly on my shoulder, completely unaware that her entire world had just changed. I wanted to storm back inside. I wanted answers. Instead, I opened the front door as if nothing had happened. Daniel looked at me for a split second. The smile disappeared from his face. The woman sitting beside him quickly stood up. "Oh, you're home early," Daniel said nervously. I looked directly into his eyes. "Who is she?" Silence. The woman grabbed her purse. "I should go." "No," I said calmly. "Stay. I'd rather hear the truth while we're all here." Daniel rubbed his forehead. "It's not what you think." I laughed. For the first time in my life. I laughed while my heart was breaking. "So tell me what I should think." Another long silence. Finally, he whispered the words I never imagined hearing. "I don't love you anymore." It felt like someone had stolen the air from my lungs. I looked down at my pregnant belly. "Our baby?" I asked quietly. He didn't even look at me. I wasn't ready for another child. Tears filled my eyes. "You knew that before we planned this, baby." I changed my mind. Those 4 words destroyed 8 years of marriage. Emma reached toward him. "Dada." She wanted her father. Daniel didn't move. Not even one step. I picked her up and held her tightly. "I hope one day," I whispered, "you remember this moment." He stayed silent. The next morning, I packed one old brown bag. Some baby clothes. A blanket. A few family photos. And the last $147 left in my bank account. I thought I would stay with my sister. But when I called, she answered with tears in her voice. "I'm so sorry, Olivia, we lost our apartment last month. We're living with friends." One by one, every door closed. My savings disappeared within weeks. Hotels became shelters. Shelters became crowded waiting lists. Then, there was nowhere left to go. Now. Months later. I was walking through a freezing snowstorm. 8 months pregnant. Carrying my 1-year-old daughter. Dragging the same worn brown bag. My fingers were turning blue. Emma began crying from the cold. I kissed her forehead. "We're going to be okay," I whispered. Even though I no longer believed those words myself. Just as I felt my legs beginning to give out, I noticed a small house at the end of the snowy road. One warm light glowed from the window. I stared at it. Then I heard something behind me. Crunch. 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 Footsteps. Someone was following us. I stopped walking. The footsteps stopped too. For a few seconds, the only sound was the wind howling through the trees. My heart pounded so hard I thought I would collapse. Emma wrapped her tiny arms around my neck. She was trembling. I turned around slowly. A tall man stood about 30 feet away. He wore a dark winter coat and carried a flashlight. His face was hidden beneath a thick wool hat. "I'm not here to hurt you," he called out. His voice sounded calm. But after everything Daniel had done, I didn't trust anyone anymore. I took another step backward. "Please," I said. "Just leave us alone." The man raised both hands. "I saw you from my porch. Your little girl is freezing." I glanced toward the house with the glowing window. So, that was his house. "I'm fine," I lied. The man looked at Emma. "No, you're not." Before I could answer, Emma started coughing. A deep, painful cough. Then another. Her tiny body shook in my arms. Panic rushed through me. I touched her forehead. She was burning with fever. "Oh, no." My voice cracked. "Emma, sweetheart, stay with Mommy." The man stepped closer but kept his distance. "My name is Samuel," he said softly. "My wife was a nurse. We still have medicine and a warm fireplace." I wanted to believe him. But fear kept whispering in my ear. What if this was another trap? What if I made the wrong choice? Then Emma whispered something so quietly I almost didn't hear it. "Mama, cold." Those 2 words broke me. I looked at the snow covering my daughter's boots. Her tiny cheeks had turned pale. Even my old brown bag was covered in ice. Inside it, our last diapers were soaked. The blanket was wet. We had nowhere else to go. Samuel slowly removed his thick winter scarf. He placed it on a wooden fence several feet away. "I won't come any closer," he said. "Take the scarf for your little girl." Then he stepped back. Far enough to show he meant every word. For the first time in months, a stranger had asked for nothing. No money. No favor. No explanation. Just, "Let me help." I wrapped the warm scarf around Emma. Almost immediately, she stopped shivering so violently. Tears rolled down my face. I looked toward the warm light inside the little house. Then back at Samuel. "I'll come inside," I whispered. "But only until my daughter is warm." Samuel gave a small nod. "You have my word." I had no idea that walking through that front door would uncover a secret that had been waiting for over 20 years. The moment I stepped inside, warm air wrapped around us like a blanket. I almost forgot what it felt like to be warm. Samuel quietly closed the door behind us. The fireplace crackled softly. The little wooden house smelled like fresh bread and cinnamon. It didn't feel like a stranger's home. It felt like the home I had lost. "Sit by the fire," Samuel said gently. I lowered Emma onto a thick wool blanket. Her tiny hands stretched toward the flames. Within minutes, the color slowly returned to her cheeks. I couldn't stop crying. Not loud tears. Just the silent kind that fall when you've been strong for too long. Samuel disappeared into the kitchen. A few minutes later, he returned with a bowl of hot chicken soup, warm milk for Emma, and dry towels. "I don't have much," he said with a small smile. "But what I have, you're welcome to share." No one had spoken to me with that kind of kindness in months. As I thanked him, my eyes wandered around the room. The house was simple. Old wooden furniture. Family photographs. A grandfather clock ticking quietly in the corner. Then, one picture caught my attention. It showed a smiling woman holding a newborn baby. Beside her stood a much younger Samuel. "Your family?" I asked. Samuel stared at the photograph for a long moment. "My wife, Grace," he whispered. "She passed away 5 years ago." "I'm so sorry." He nodded quietly. "We also had a daughter." I smiled softly. "Where is she now?" Samuel's face changed. The smile disappeared. "I don't know." I frowned. "What do you mean?" He looked into the fire before answering. 22 years ago, she disappeared." I felt chills run through my body. "Disappeared?" "It was Christmas Eve," he said. "There was a terrible snowstorm, just like tonight. We lost everything in a car accident. When I woke up in the hospital, my little girl was gone. The police searched for months. They never found her." The room became silent. Samuel reached into a small wooden box beside the fireplace. He carefully pulled out a tiny silver bracelet. It was the only thing they ever found. I stared at the bracelet. My breathing stopped. My hands began to shake. Because I had seen that bracelet before. Many times. My grandmother had kept one exactly like it inside an old jewelry box. She always told me, "This belonged to your mother, but never ask where it came from." I slowly looked back at Samuel. He had no idea that the answer he'd been searching for over 20 years might be sitting right in front of him. The room fell completely silent. The fire continued to crackle. But I couldn't hear it anymore. My eyes remained fixed on the tiny silver bracelet in Samuel's trembling hand. It looked exactly the same. The tiny heart charm. The small scratch near the clasp. Even the faded engraving. I whispered before I could stop myself. My grandmother had one just like that. Samuel slowly looked up. "What did you say?" I swallowed hard. "When I was little, I found a silver bracelet in my grandmother's jewelry box. She took it away from me. When I asked who it belonged to, she always said, 'Some questions should never be answered.'" Samuel's face turned pale. "Your grandmother's name?" "Margaret Carter." His hands began to shake. "Where did you grow up?" "A small town called Pine Ridge." Samuel stood so quickly that his chair slid across the wooden floor. "I searched that town. The police told me no child matching my daughter's description had ever been found there." "I know," I whispered. "Because everyone believed my grandparents were my real parents." Samuel stared at me without blinking. My heart was racing. "Olivia," he said softly. "Where are your birth records?" "I've never seen them. My grandparents always said the documents were destroyed in a house fire." Samuel slowly sat back down. Tears filled his eyes. For 22 years. I visited orphanages. I hired private investigators. I never stopped searching. His voice broke. And now? You're telling me you don't even know who your real parents are? I couldn't breathe. All my life, I believed I had lost everything because of Daniel. But now, it felt like I had never known the truth about my life at all. Just then, Emma began coughing again. A violent cough. Then another. Her tiny body felt hotter than before. I touched her forehead. She was burning. Samuel immediately reached for the thermometer. A few seconds later, he looked at the screen. His expression changed instantly. 104 degrees. My heart stopped. What? She needs a hospital. Now. Outside. The snowstorm had become even worse. The roads were almost completely buried. Samuel grabbed his truck keys without saying another word. I'll get the truck ready. As he opened the front door, a freezing gust of wind rushed inside. Then we heard it. A loud knock. 3 slow, heavy knocks. Someone was standing outside in the middle of the storm. Samuel slowly froze. The knocking came again. Knock. 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 At that hour, in the middle of a blizzard, no one should have been outside. Samuel looked at me. Take Emma and lock yourselves in the bedroom. My heart raced. What if it's someone who needs help? Samuel's expression turned serious. Or someone who knows you're here. I picked Emma up and hurried toward the hallway. She was breathing faster now. Every second felt precious. From the bedroom, I could hear Samuel unlocking the front door. The old hinges creaked. Then, silence. A deep voice finally broke it. Evening, sir. I'm looking for a young pregnant woman. The blood drained from my face. How could anyone know I was here? Samuel answered calmly. I haven't seen anyone. The man stepped closer. I think you have. I tracked her footprints through the snow. I gently pulled the curtain aside just enough to see. A black SUV was parked outside. Standing on the porch was Daniel. My husband. His expensive coat was covered in snow. His face looked tired. But not sorry. He looked desperate. I just want to talk to my wife, Daniel said. Samuel didn't move. Your wife doesn't seem to want to talk to you. Daniel sighed. You don't understand. Samuel folded his arms. Then explain. For a moment, Daniel looked down at the snow. When he spoke again, his voice sounded different. I made the biggest mistake of my life. I lost everything. The woman I left Olivia for. She took all my money. She emptied my accounts. She disappeared. I have nothing left. I closed my eyes. Not once. Did he say he missed me? Not once. Did he ask about Emma? Not once. Did he ask if our unborn baby was safe? He only talked about what he had lost. Samuel glanced toward the hallway. He already knew the answer. You should leave. Daniel shook his head. I can't. I need my family back. At that exact moment, Emma let out a weak cry. Daniel heard her. Emma. He tried to step inside. Samuel blocked the doorway. Move. No. Daniel's face twisted with anger. That's my daughter. Samuel's voice remained calm. Then start acting like her father. The two men stared at each other. Then, red and blue lights flashed through the falling snow. A police cruiser pulled into the driveway. Two officers stepped out. One of them walked straight toward the porch. Mr. Daniel Brooks? Daniel turned around. Yes. The officer removed a folded document from his coat. We have a warrant for your arrest. Daniel's face turned white. For what? The officer looked him directly in the eyes. Fraud. And identity theft. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. But what the officer said next was even more shocking. The investigation started after someone reported a fake birth certificate with your wife's name on it. Daniel's face lost all its color. A fake birth certificate, he whispered. The police officer nodded. Yes. And that's only the beginning. Snow continued falling around the porch. Samuel stood quietly beside the officers. I stepped into the doorway, still holding Emma close against my chest. Daniel saw me. His eyes filled with tears. Olivia, please. I can explain. I looked at him without saying a word. 4 months. I had imagined this moment. I thought I would scream. I thought I would cry. Instead, I felt nothing. The officer unfolded a thick file. Mr. Brooks, our investigation shows you forged several legal documents. You opened bank accounts using your wife's identity. You applied for personal loans in her name. And he paused. You attempted to register your unborn child under false legal records. I stared at Daniel in disbelief. Our baby? He lowered his head. I was drowning in debt. I thought I could fix everything. You stole my identity? I whispered. He couldn't even look at me. I never wanted it to go this far. The officer continued. 3 different hospitals reported suspicious paperwork. One nurse noticed that the signatures didn't match. That's what started the investigation. Suddenly, Samuel stepped forward. Officer, I believe this young woman may also be the missing child from a 22-year-old cold case. Both officers looked at him. What? Samuel explained everything. The silver bracelet. The missing daughter. My grandmother. The missing birth records. The officers exchanged surprised glances. One of them spoke into his radio, requesting immediate access to the Pine Ridge Missing Persons Archive. A few minutes later, his radio crackled. We found the file. The officer looked down at the report, then slowly raised his eyes toward me. His voice became quiet. Olivia. There was one identifying mark listed on the missing child. A small crescent-shaped birthmark. Behind her left ear. Samuel's breathing stopped. He looked at me with trembling eyes. I remember that birthmark. Without speaking, I gently moved my hair away from my left ear. Everyone stared. The tiny crescent-shaped birthmark was still there. Samuel covered his mouth with both hands. Tears poured down his face. For 22 years, he had searched every city, every shelter, every orphanage, never giving up hope. And now, standing in the middle of a snowstorm, he realized the impossible. The frightened young woman he had rescued was almost certainly his daughter. No one spoke. The snow drifted silently outside the window. Inside, the only sound was Emma's gentle breathing against my shoulder. Samuel looked at me as if he were afraid to blink. Afraid that if he did, I might disappear again. Tears filled his eyes. "I've dreamed about this moment for 22 years, he whispered. "But I don't want to force you to believe anything." I slowly walked toward him. "I don't know if you're my father. But I know one thing. You saved my life. And you saved my children's lives." Samuel couldn't hold back his tears anymore. He gently placed his hand on my shoulder. "That's enough for me." The next morning, the snowstorm finally ended. Samuel drove Emma and me to the hospital. The doctors treated Emma's fever immediately. A few hours later, her temperature began to fall. She smiled for the first time in days. That tiny smile felt like a miracle. Meanwhile, the police continued investigating my grandparents' past. A week later, the DNA test results arrived. I sat beside Samuel in complete silence. Neither of us had the courage to open the envelope. Finally, the detective smiled. "The results are conclusive." He looked at Samuel. "Congratulations. You found your daughter." Samuel broke down in tears. So did I. For the first time in my life, I knew where I truly belonged. Months later, I gave birth to a healthy baby boy. Samuel stood beside me in the delivery room. The first person to hold my son was the grandfather who had spent 22 years praying for another chance. Daniel was convicted of fraud, identity theft, and financial crimes. He was ordered to repay every debt created in my name. But by then, I no longer cared about revenge. Because life had already given me something far greater. A family. A home. And hope. The little house that once appeared as nothing more than a warm light in a snowstorm became our home. Emma loved running through the yard every morning, laughing as snowflakes landed on her tiny blonde hair. My son took his first steps across the same wooden floor where I had once stood, cold, frightened, and completely alone. Sometimes, I would stand on the porch during the first snowfall of winter, holding both of my children, watching Samuel smile as he built snowmen with them. Then I would remember that terrible night. The night I believed my life was over. The night I almost gave up. If I had stopped walking, if I had lost hope, I never would have reached the house with the warm light. And I never would have found my father. Because sometimes, the road that feels like the end of your life is actually the path leading you home.